Yes. Yeah, good to meet you. We've never met.
I'm sorry?
We've never met. We've never been on a panel before, but we've never met.
Yeah. You've been here before.
Oh,
thank you.
You're good. Yeah. Well, good. Well, we'll talk soon, and we'll listen to each other soon. Set the bar low, please.
Are you sleeping already?
This was the one on Pope Francis? Yeah, I know. I want to get the seat. Yeah, the audio. Yeah. Yeah, I heard it was great. Nice to see you. Thank you. Hey, you can get more of me if you sign up to my e-blast. You can get something from me every month.
I'm all right, thank you.
We can maybe talk later. I have a job to do.
Well, yeah, because
thank you so much.
You can sign up for my e-blast every month, and you can get an e-blast, and they're funny. I mean, they're pithy and they're funny. Oh yeah. I'm from Michigan. I grew up in Detroit, and I'm leaving tomorrow to go to Bloomfield Hills where my family is. You're kidding? Yeah. Well, I would love to go to Kalamazoo. Yeah. No, I come all the time. Okay. Great.
Okay. Oh, are they?
Okay,
I don't.
let's get this party started.
Fantastic. Wish them the best for me.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 4:30 panel, number 3861. Title of the panel is Creativity and Imagination, 1 + 1 = 3. This panel is a tribute, in part, to Howard Schultz, who was a longtime participant in this conference, very popular participant. I'm told the father of reality TV, who passed away suddenly and unexpectedly this past December. So all the panelists, I think, knew him, were close to him, and so we are remembering Howard in this panel because he really believed in the 1 + 1 = 3 component of the Conference on World Affairs, that it was the bringing together of the panelists and the unexpected nature of the dialogue that made that formula right. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. Evelyn Resh is directly to my left. Evelyn is a practicing nurse, midwife, and sexuality counselor, a writer, and sought-after speaker. Her 2 books approach sexuality from an integrative health and whole life perspective. I know you'll appreciate her warmth and humor. James Tanabe has a master's degree in international studies with a business with a focus in international strategy and for creative industries. James speaks 6 languages, has lived on 4 continents, and specializes in large-scale intercultural project management. I would say he's a citizen of the world, and as part of his work, he'll be relocating to Jakarta and Johannesburg successively over the next couple of years. Lou Dubose is a thoughtful political journalist and co-author of several books on important political figures of our time. In addition, he has written to his written works, he has appeared on numerous television and radio forums. And finally, Liz Weir is an internationally renowned and award-winning storyteller and writer from Northern Ireland. She's is the author of more than 20 children's books and scripts for television animations aimed at young children that promote respect for differences. Liz is a longtime participant in the Conference on World Affairs. So the format is the usual format. Each of the speakers will be given about 10 minutes to make opening remarks, and then I'll ask them if they have any questions or comments for one another, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. So with that, we'll get started. Evelyn.
I thought I was going second, but oh well. So, have any of you heard me speak before at CWA? I'm just curious. So some of you know me. So Howard was my very dear friend, and the last time I spoke to him, actually, we were talking about CWA and some of the things he was proposing, and of course it quickly became dismantled into something funny, because that's what Howard and I did, and it was an incredible adhesive. And my creativity exploded in the company of Howard, which led me to believe that it was all about Howard and not about me, and somehow I was sort of some celestial channel. And Howard corrected that and told me, no, that it was actually me. What I learned and what I want to put forth in this panel is that Lou and I don't know each other, but Liz and James and I do, and I'm in good company. These are deeply creative colleagues and friends of mine from CWA, and their creativity is very different than mine. It's more stable. Mine is highly unstable and is largely improvisational. Something happens to me in conversation with people, watching them, looking closely at them. If I find them to be unusual or atypical, I refer to my weapons of mass destruction, which are my eyes. I hold them in my gaze. I try to figure out what it is about them that I find ridiculous. And then I go for it. And this is how I work. And this is how I find things that are funny. And in healthcare and in crime, those are the two areas of life that you'll see the, sort of the theater of the bizarre at all times. This is great fodder for my humor, because the things that happen in my day, no one would believe unless they were a private detective. They might believe it. Things that come into the emergency room, cases that come in and the things people say, and you think, wow, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And then, my brain starts to fire, and then I write about it. To me, creativity it's a staff of life for me. It's one of the components of the 4 food groups, along with cake and salt. Creativity, salt, humor, cake. Like, I could live forever on those things. And I can't tell you when that Halley's Comet of funny is going to come through me. I can only tell you that I am a receptacle for it at all times. It is the only way that I can live in the world, is to find things that are funny and a lot of gallows humor, a lot of non-Republican humor. It's a deeply important life force for me, and I know exactly what this panel means. 1 + 1 = 3, because if you have that impulse for humor and creativity, you can compound things. Things can grow exponentially. But you have to be receptive, and that's really what I want to leave you with, is that receptivity is really the key here, and creativity comes in all sorts of forms. For me, it's humor, and it's humorous writing that's both, pithy and funny. So I'm going to turn it over to my more stable colleagues and see what they have to say.
Thank you for that, and thank all of you for being here. I think I want to talk about a myth in creativity, that there's no wrong answers in creativity. There's no wrong ideas in creativity. that's absolutely false. You can be so wrong in creativity, and there are so many wrong things in creativity in the creation process. It's just that it's expected that will happen. And I think that there's a poison in part of the creative arts right now, where we're starting to think too much about every idea has to be treated like a precious treasure. And I think it's clouding some of the productivity in the creative arts. And at the end of the day, I think what I really want to be chatting about is a little bit what Evelyn teed up, which is how the people around us, our associates in the creative spaces, in the creative arts, how they are the only people we can really trust to tell us when we're absolutely shit. And that these people are so valuable and so important to keep dear to you, because finding those honest people, it's a rare thing. I think about my clowning partner that I met when I was at l'École Nationale de Cirque in Montreal, who convinced me that I was not funny, which was painful to realize. And the reason why he did it was not to hurt me, but to teach me through practice that once you realize you're not funny, you have the opportunity to actually become funny. And to have a friend so lovingly destroy you in order to so carefully build you back up and make you a success, I would much rather have that as the gift that creative arts has given me than people treating my ideas with kid gloves. And that comes through feedback. I'd like to do two things with all of you today, and it will probably devolve into chaos at some point. When it does, I'm going to say, let's pause for a moment. And I'll just ask that whatever we're doing, whatever conversation we're having, that we will actually just pause. And then I'll ask you guys a question. And if you have an idea, just put out what it is, and then the group will sort of internalize it. All right? So the first exercise is a build-up to the second. And the real goal in this is not to succeed, but rather to identify why we as a group are maybe not succeeding. Okay? So the exercise is simple. We're going to count from 1 to 20. You may have done an exercise like this. As a group.
Oh, yes, I love this.
All right? So the only rules are no 1. If you're saying 1, say 1. All right? If 1 is said at the same time as someone else, then we go back to 0.
Yes, I love this. I do this here. This is great.
All right? So the key here is going to be listening and trying to feel when is the right moment to participate and to join in this creative exercise. All right? So let's start in silence. When you're ready. Okay, let's pause for a moment.
Okay, James, this is funny. Yeah. This is funny. Yeah, this is a funny moment for you.
Why's that?
Yeah. I mean, this exercise.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever done. No.
And you didn't even say 1.
No, I didn't. I was so stunned.
So I'd like to ask the audience, so what's happening here?
People aren't listening.
Directions are unclear. What about the directions are unclear? Perfect. All right, let me address this. So the goal is, as a group, 1 at a time, one person will say 1, and then the next person's job is to say 2. And then someone else's job is to say 3. Thank you for that feedback.
But not at the same time.
This is essential. This is where I'm telling you that I was unclear in my instructions. I didn't set you up for success. And this was a perfect example where kid gloves would not have helped us achieve creative success as a group. What else were we doing, aside from the unclear instructions? Being cautious?
Listening to each other.
All right. So let's pause there. Those are 3 pieces of feedback. Let's try the exercise again. We'll start in silence. And when you're ready.
1, 2.
Too fast.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. Evelyn, do you have any feedback?
I'm taking notes. Copious notes.
All right, so what did we do that was better this time?
You got to 2.
We did get to 2. We did get to 2, which is 100% improvement over last time. That's already not bad.
No,
But remember, if we say 2 at the same time, we restart as a group. So there's no us over here and us over there. It's the whole group all together. I'd like to try this 2 more times. And again, the goal... Sorry, there's a comment in the back.
Exactly.
All right, fair enough. So I hear 2 pieces to that. The comment was, if you hear someone say a number, don't say it again, which means 2 things to me. That if you say a number, make sure that you say it like you're crying it from the mountaintops. And the other one is to be very receptive to that listening. All right? So we're just going to try this 2 more times, because again, the goal is the feedback. It's not to get to 20. If we do, I mean, it's a miracle. 6 weeks in some cases, says Liz. All right, so let's try it again. We'll start in silence.
1, 2.
Okay. Let's reset. Let's reset to 1. We'll start in silence and
1, 2, 3.
let's reset.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
So,
That's good.
what are we doing well?
This.
What happens at number 4? And why are we stopping listening?
We want to jump in. We're all excited. Yeah.
Exactly. What are we excited about?
Beats me. I mean, I don't know.
So I think there's part of that success, right? We're very eager, right? We're having success. We have that taste of success, and we get really excited about this process. There's another thought.
We really wanted success. It's not 1, 2.
No, that's not in the rules. It's not in the rules.
Should be.
Yes?
No,
You think those-
no, self-regulation. I have no idea.
No, I mean, I appreciate the thought, but it's great to hear these different ideas that we need a system, we need a leader, we need to listen to each other. All of these are absolutely valid ideas in the creative process. The challenge is going to be to understand how we're going to find this answer without being able to take a caucus, right? And to try and see how we can discover this spontaneously. And this is why I say that counting to 20 as a group is a creative process. All right? So let's start in silence again. This is our last attempt, and then I'll go to my last exercise. I hope I'm all right on time. Am I?
We'll give you some of Evelyn's.
All right, all right.
1, 2.
Reset. We'll reset back to 0 again.
2, 3, 4.
4 is killing us. Let's reset.
Last time. Shh.
1, 2, 3.
Let's reset. I heard 2 2s.
Yeah.
6.
There's always one.
Perfect. So, guys, let me be very, very clear, right? This was a creative process, and we failed. But that's okay, right? I mean, what was important to me was the discussion of this process, hearing the different ideas. Some ideas worked, some ideas were confusing. The propositions of a 6 coming out, I mean, this to me is creativity.
Very good.
All right, it is a creative process. It's all of those, we call in French l'électron libre, all of these random players that sort of pop in and pop out. But I just want to be very clear that if we had approached this as though everybody's proposition was right, we would not have been able to have the dialogue that we did. And this is just the beginning of a process with a lot of strangers. So I understand that we would be working through some of these fits and starts and all of that. But thank you for that. I do want to finish with my last one. You could do this forever, but so this one here is, let's think of a rainforest. Okay? And think of the sounds that you would hear in a rainforest. Now, the overlay between this exercise and the last exercise is if everybody right now, well, let's do this. Imagine a sound in the rainforest. I'm going to count to 3, and then everybody will make that sound. Okay? 1, 2, 3. So no rainforest in the world sounds like that. I promise you. So the overlay on this is you have your number 4, right? And you want to shout your number 4, and then the problem is that everybody else in the room has their number 4, and we end up with this cacophony, and everybody's stepping over each other's ideas. The key here is we're going to start in silence again. Someone's going to start one of their sounds. This is a very nice one, by the way. I see Liz in my peripheral vision. One person by themselves, you can barely hear it, but everyone together starts to make a very nice sound. So we'll start in silence. When you think you have part of the rainforest that you can put into that, add it. If you feel that the rainforest is getting too populated, pull back. And we'll just try this for maybe 30 seconds, a minute or so, and let's see if as a group we can negotiate the creative process of creating a rainforest here in UMC 235. All right, so let's start in silence. And when you're ready. I could listen to this for hours. But we won't. Guys, so listen, I could end here, but I just want to come back to this idea of the feedback. Okay, so we'll just take 3 or 4 comments from people, and thank you guys for your indulgence. If I could just get, 3 or 4 pieces of feedback, what worked and what didn't. Okay, okay. Any other pieces of feedback, observations? Yes. Listening as well. I did hear that people would pull back when things got too loud. I thought that was a great success. Maybe 2 more comments or so?
Your suggestion to pull back, it sounded like it was getting too much.
Yeah, I think that the people followed each other well. Maybe another comment?
There's no sense of order.
Was that a positive or a negative thing for you? A positive thing. So things went forward in an organic way. Great. So thank you for the feedback, everybody. Thank you for the thoughts. I just wanted to point out that what we've done here in just, well, maybe 15 minutes, sorry everyone, was the beginning of how every show that I've ever created starts. You have strangers coming into a room, nervous about the way they're going to look in front of everybody else, unsure of what the person next to them is going to do. But just through this process of feedback and acknowledging the fact that we're going to make mistakes, we start to create a culture, our own culture within this room, of creativity. And I just wanted everyone to experience a little bit of that today. So thank you for your time.
This is hilarious. All right, James. This is hilarious. I've moderated panels for 10 years. I've never been on a panel like this. Go ahead.
I was more than indulgent because I got nothing. I got nothing, but I'll try. I would like to. I was fortunate. It was my great fortune in life to write 3 books with the late Molly Ivins, who was a regular at this conference, who loved this conference, and was Molly, who loved this conference, and by whom the conference and was loved by the conference. The first time I came to the conference, I really didn't want to come. Molly said, and I said this last year, but I always recycle the few jokes that I have. Molly said, it's great fun. She said they'll put you on 2 panels a day. One of them will be about the theory of the American presidency, and the other will be about masturbation. And I thought, okay, there's one topic on which I have firsthand experience, and the other, as I said, I got nothing. Back to Molly, she was a remarkably, her secret was that she could take complicated ideas that, from a political perspective that many people found offensive, and she could package them in her third language, which was Texan. She spoke French, good French. She spoke Smith College English, and she spoke Texas patois. And that was her secret. I mean, she was brilliant, one, but the other secret was that she knew how to create a constituency by not scaring them off. On her 60th birthday, we had a big party at her house, and those who stayed, and some of us, we said, we're going to get her to tell her secret. So for those of us who stayed late, she said, here's the one piece of advice with which I would like to leave you. Never, ever, ever plant bamboo. And think about it, all right? To move on, I'm fortunate to have made my living with a typewriter, with a keyboard, and I consider that a great fortune and also responsibility as a journalist. I'm not funny. My wife tells me that every day. You're not funny. You talk too much to your friend. She regularly tells me I'm not funny. So I know that. But I am a journalist, and I'm not a novelist. But I thought I would talk a little bit about the creative process in writing a novel based on other people's experience, because there is no secret. I had once had this discussion with Larry McMurtry, the great Texas writer, best known for Lonesome Dove, but who has written 3 magnificent early novels before he was 30 years old about Texas. And his secret is that it's not an art, it's a craft. He gets up every morning at 5. He works for 4 hours, or until he types on a typewriter 10 double-space pages. That's 2,500 words. He is so diligent and so disciplined that I think 2001 he went to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist told him he had to have bypass surgery. He said, I can't, I'm starting a novel. And the cardiologist said, when will you finish? He took out a pencil, he did the math, and he said, I'll finish on December 19th. Such was his writing process. He finished on the 17th, and he had his surgery, and things went well. And he's come back to write several novels, and I think he's one of the country's great literary intellectuals, which is huge coming out of Texas. The best line I've heard all day is Jim Smith, who said, Russia is not the Soviet Union. Russia is Texas. We don't want Texas with nukes. Another approach is much more looking for inspiration. And Leslie Mormon Silko is a friend of Larry's, and she was at our house for dinner one night, years ago, and she's an American Indian, and her process is completely different. She listens for voices and waits for inspiration. She has rattlesnakes living under her house. She knows them. She tells a story of being stuck on a novel and not being able to get where she wanted to go, and going out on her wall outside her house and painting a giant snake. So I went inside to get paints. I'm a frustrated visual artist, and painted a snake on the wall. This wall is very prominent in downtown Tucson. Why would I make a fool of myself because everyone can see this crazy lady painting? I kept painting and painting and painting. I decided if I could make it look right, I might finish the novel. I worked for about 6 months, and with the snake came a message. The message was in Spanish. The people are cold, the people are hungry, the rich have stolen the land, the rich has stolen the freedom, the people cry out for justice, otherwise revolution. I put it on the wall in Spanish because that time in Arizona they'd outlawed Spanish. They made English the only legal language. That's bullshit in the American Southwest where I'm from, but that's what I did. And then she started her novel. There is one after another. But there's no one creative process. I will conclude with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote the literary monument, 100 Years of Solitude. He was driving, he had wanted to write this novel for a long time. He was driving in the 60s, he was living in the south of Mexico City, he was driving his family to a vacation on the Mexican Pacific coast. And it was the middle of the day, the kids were asleep, his wife Mercedes was asleep, and he started thinking about his grandfather. And he remembered the stories his grandfather told him, and he realized that this was the narrative voice for the novel. When the family woke up, they were traveling east to Mexico City. They never made it to the coast. He locked himself in an office behind his house that he called La Cueva, and for over the course of 300 and some odd days, while his wife fended off bill collectors, he wrote one of the greatest novels ever. So I just think I'm of the Larry McMurtry, writing is a craft school of thinking, and then to get to Hemingway, and this will be my last thing. Hemingway wrote that you sit down and you begin with one good sentence. And I'm going to read one good sentence by an obscure novelist, and I think it's one of the best leads in non-literary fiction. When I finally caught up with Abraham Treherne, he was drinking beer with an alcoholic bulldog named Firedog Roberts in a ramshackle joint just out of Sonoma, California, drinking the heart right out of a fine spring afternoon. That's James Crumley from Last Good Kiss, and I think if you can start with those aspiring writers, don't believe the adage everyone has one good novel in them and that's where it belongs. Write that first good sentence.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, it's an honor to be on this panel and to think about Howard. Evelyn, I've just come from a panel on maintaining mental health, and if you'd heard what I had to say, you wouldn't say I'm stable, honestly, you really wouldn't. You never say you're stable. You never. So this is a great honor because I love to see so many young people here. I work as a storyteller, but a lot of what I do is to do creative writing workshops in schools, elementary schools, high schools. I do teachers' workshops, and I always know what sort of place I'm in when I ask this question. What's the first thing you do before you write a story? And the hand goes up. You put on your name and your date. Oh my God. I think, really? Okay, is that what you do? Okay, so I know what I'm in, you know? But of course, the first thing you do is what? Sharpen your pencils. They say sharpen your pencils, except they don't use pencils really so much these days. Think. So I do a lot of work on thinking. We have a strand in the Northern Ireland curriculum. It's thinking skills and personal capabilities. Doesn't that sound good? And there's 5, it's brilliant actually. And one of them is being creative. And I wrote a story about animals in the forest and a little fairy. They found this fairy in the middle of the forest. And she had a broken wing and she was crying. And it turns out she was a tooth fairy on her first mission. And she needed to get her bag of teeth back to the fairy hill, but it was too heavy. She collected too many. And she, if I don't get home before the morning, the children aren't going to get any money. And they, you know, a real whinge bag. You call it a whiner, I think. Anyway.
So the animals all the animals are sitting around trying to think, how are they going to get this fairy home? And the little ant's going, I know, and they say, don't be stupid, you're far too small. You don't have any good ideas. And that attitude really makes me mad. Because some of the most creative people I meet are under 5. I don't know what happens, well actually I do know what happens to people as they get older. Parents have a role to play. Teachers have a huge role to play, which is why I love to talk to student teachers. When I'm out doing any teacher's workshop, I say to them, a lot of people come into teaching because they had one special teacher in their lives. I heard Robert Cormier, the late Robert Cormier, great writer, talking in Australia. We were doing a workshop or a panel together, and he said when he was 11, a nun came to him and said, Robert, you're a writer. Never before did he think he was a writer. I asked children, how many of you here are writers? I say, could you do this with me, people? Could you please? James did it, so I'm going to point your finger up in the air. Out in front of you. Down to the ground, back in. Yeah, you can all be. Now, you aren't all going to go out and do that one great novel, but you have the capability of writing something. Should it be an email to your nearest and dearest? But you have to believe in yourself first. So a lot of my work is building up people's confidence as to what they can do, not what they can't do. I got 21 out of 100 for art. I was crushed. I never picked up a pencil again, I have a daughter who's was drawing from the moment she could pick up a pencil, and she was good. She got an A star when she was 16. She went on to another school where she created an installation about memories. Her art teacher told her it wasn't art. She came out of that with an E, and she has never picked up a pen or a pencil since. That's it. So everybody is different. You can be crushed. You can be encouraged. I like to encourage. I like to get them. So I've answered every question that there is to answer from kids on how you get to be a writer or what's it like to be a writer. And my favourite one, and I got it from a little boy of 8 last week. What inspired you? So here's the story. You're going to get a story from me. You'd expect it, wouldn't you? When I was growing up, I was the youngest of a big family. I told people this yesterday. And the youngest of 5. But I was at home with my mother, who didn't work until my father died. So I would come up to the front door. She'd open the door. I'd say, excuse me, is this the Eagle Star Hotel? It wasn't. And she'd say, yes, would you like a room? And I'd say, please. And she'd bring me in, and I'd have a piece of paper there, and I'd sign in. I'd give myself a beautiful name like Caroline or Diana, because nobody ever likes their own name. Then she would show me into the phenomenon known as the front room. I think you might call it the parlour, the good room if you had one. You never went into it because there was never a fire. It was never, it was freezing. So she'd say, will this be all right? And I'd say, yes, thank you. And I'd go in and I'd have a doll planted there, and I'd say, oh, someone has abandoned a baby. And she'd say, that was that family that were there last week. They had several children. Would you like to adopt this one? And I'd say, oh, yes, please. And so I'd fill in the papers to adopt this baby. I'd give the baby a beautiful name as well. Lovely name. How could I not be inspired with a mother that didn't say, don't be so stupid? Is that all you have to do? Making up stupid stories. No, she went with it. She was a woman who passed an exam for grammar school when 1930 something, 1928. She wasn't allowed to go because her brother had to go. He got the scholarship, she stayed at home. So she pushed me in terms of just giving me the freedom. But now I hear in America there's all these tests, lots of tests. People are teaching to test. Young people need freedom to explore. I say at teachers' workshops, and everybody sharpens their pencil or gets a pen, 10 ways to become a better writer. Have you got your pencil, Lucas? Are you all set with the pencil? Right. Are you ready to count? Read. Read crazy stuff. You have to be a bit crazy sometimes, From your Dr. Seuss's to your Harry Potters, from whatever, read. Adults read children's books. Because adult books are about relationships, and children's books can be about anything. You can walk through a wardrobe and you're into this magical land, all sorts of things can happen. So we need to be thinking about how we inspire creativity. Should it be the child? Again, I work with a lot of children with special needs, autism, Asperger's, children who have talents that are sometimes overlooked, but you can draw them out. You can draw these talents out, whatever you're good at. So I work with dyslexic kids. I can't do it because I can't spell and I can't. And I'm going, what? You can think. Let's think. And we scribe. Worked with a group of adults with learning disability. We did a marvellous Cinderella rap. If you want to see me over the weekend, I'll tell you, or over the next few days. Cinderella rap that they did. They used their own language, they used local dialect, and they performed it in front of the health minister. And I said to them, who did this? I said, we did. And they did. All I did was the vehicle, ask them questions. Right? Once upon a time, there was a girl called Cindy. She lived near Boulder with her sisters Anne and Mindy. She had to clean the toilet. She had to sweep she had to wash they gave her more on. Early one morning, who came to call? Hello, have you been reading fairy tales? He doesn't come in the morning, it's not round Boulder. And that's the way I do it with them. So they say, the postman, and away you go. But if you believe you can't do something, you'll never do it. If you believe you can do something, you can do it. So you're not the best speller in the world, you don't like reading thick books, but you need to believe in yourself that you can do it. And we have a role to play. I hope, as I said that to you about teachers, you thought of the best teacher you ever had in your life. You probably quickly thought of the worst one you ever had in your life. I had one that used to cry and say, Elizabeth Martin, your knitting's very holy. I thought it was good to have holy knitting, you know. So, creativity, imagination, that's what we need. We need the spark. It's not being the best speller, the best reader, the best writer. It's about, again, having somebody to spark off. Now, the exercise before I finish, James did that 1 to 20. That's one of my favourite exercises to do. Because listening is the most important thing, and we're not good at it. We're really not good at it. People talk over each other all the time, and I think it's really important. I was with a class once a week for 8 weeks. It took us to week 8 till we got them to 20. They just would not listen to each other. They wouldn't. So it's a really good exercise to do, no matter what age you are, to try that. Because you have to learn to just shut up. And then at the end they're saying, shut up. And then the smart ones say, let's do it. You be 1 and you be 2. And I'm going, no, we're not doing that. See, that's what they thought of. So really, that's a really important thing to do, to get them listen. Because if you don't listen, what are you ever going to learn? So tell stories, share stories. I go into, you would call them kindergarten classes. And I ask them, how many of them have ever played this game? Where you put a blanket over a table and you go in underneath and it's a den, it's a cave. You'd be horrified how few of them have ever played that game. What does it cost? Nothing. What does it give you? A dinosaur cave, a bat cave, a castle, can be anything. So whenever I go out to restaurants and I see mummy and daddy both on their cell phones and the 2 children on tablets, I just want to pull them off them and throw them in the bin and say, would you please talk with your children? Talk to them. So that's all I'm going to say for now. I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Can I amend my comments?
Yes.
Because it occurred to me that actually I might have said something worthwhile and failed to recognize it. So I'd like to give it one more try. And that is, in the context of discussing both Mali and voice, and Garcia Marquez finding his voice, and one good sentence, I think if I were aspiring to write a novel, which I might be in a year or two, I would begin with what Liz said. Read and read and read deeply and broadly. And the other is, I would start with one good sentence. And that one good sentence would be in my voice. You have already, by reading, absorbed all the other voices. So the idea that you would write one good sentence in your voice is how one would begin. And then you write a second good sentence and you write a second good sentence. It's not that daunting. But I do think that reading is such an important piece of this, because it's beyond your personal experiences. And the younger you are, the fewer you have. So reading is reading is, I think, deeply and broadly is critical to the creative process because it's what the creative process was.
Thank you.
That's for a second term.
All right. Well, let's see. Before we go to Q&A from the audience, do any of the other panelists wish to amend their comments or question the other panelists?
I don't have a thing to amend. I just am going to ask James for a date. Because I realize that actually, this thing that's been floating above my head and confusing me for entirely too long just sort of fell into place when I heard him talking about what he was talking about and playing that crazy whatever it was, that this idea that all ideas are worthwhile and that, this myth of no wrong answers. When I was working on one of my books, I think it was the first one, which actually was a big piece of psychological work for me, and came from all sorts of conflicts that I had been experiencing and had as a teenager. I had a woman who was helping me, who was a professional writer, and I'm not a professional writer. And she said to me, okay, look, if we're going to do this together, you need to be willing to kill your little darlings. Mm-hmm. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, this is an expression. Let's bring you up to speed here. You think that this part is great? It's not. Get over it, get it out of there, delete the entire page. The whole page, Carrie, I can't. It was such a great piece of work. She said, no, it isn't. So when James was saying this, it reminded me of this guidance that I got from Carrie about how, yeah, you may think it's a great idea, but actually it's not flying. It doesn't have what it needs to have. And I think if you're going to be a creative person in a serious way, you have to be very thick-skinned and you have to be willing to look at yourself critically. And this is especially true if you don't function well in groups. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm asked to leave virtually every group, every meeting that I've ever attended. I don't seem to be able to contain myself and behave appropriately. I am not a good group member. Even in my when I had a corporate job, finally my very dear and understanding manager came and she said, Ev, we have to ask you, please don't come to any more meetings. And I said, has it gotten that bad? She said, it's worse than that. We can't manage with how you conduct yourself. We'll give you the minutes. I said, oh, okay. All right. So hence, also what Lou said, there's no right way to do this. I write completely by myself. And now I've moved from nonfiction prose nonfiction prose into short form. I love being able to condense an idea with humor and pithiness, something close to the bone in 350 to 400 words or less. That is a fabulous thing. It excites me. It's interesting. So I just think that, to piggyback on what both of you said, this is really true. And you can make some big mistakes, but you won't recognize it unless you're willing to. And that includes from other people who read it and say, it's not good, or who see it and say, this doesn't work.
Mm. And you can start to teach this early on. I mean, I work usually, say, for 8 weeks, once a week with a class. And I've seen other schools that produce little booklets of children's work, and it's dire. And you're actually not doing them any favours. You're really not doing them any favours. Working with a group of young people, you can teach them to revise their work, to go back, to do drafts and redrafts. You can start that really young. I bring them, Seamus Heaney taught me at college, I was a very lucky person, but you can get a photocopy of a draft of one of his early poems and you see how he puts a line through things and he changes things. You can teach them that skill early on, not wait until they go to high school. You can teach them it very early on. And actually, I say to them, is that the best word? When we do Titanic, what do you think of? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you see? You're in a lifeboat. What happens? The boat sank. Right. Is that the best word we could use? Is that the best? What could we, when you end up saying the giant liners slip beneath the waters. Now that's great for an 8-year-old to say that, and they can do it if you just make them stop and think of the best word. And that's what I love to do. And you can teach that skill fairly early on. I actually live with a critic. Her name's Claire Weir. She's my daughter, and she'll just say, "Mother, do you think that's good?"
Yeah, daughters can do, they're the best at that. They'll throw out all your work, though. You have to be careful.
All right. Thank you very much to the panel members for those provocative thoughts and interesting thoughts. We have about a half an hour for a Q&A, and we have 2 mics here and here. So let's have your questions, and we'll see where this goes. 1 + 1 = 3. Remember that.
Hello. Well, among my many creative processes, some of which work and some of which don't, one of the ones I like is just writing a bunch of stuff, scrapping it, writing a bunch of stuff, scrapping it, continuing. And on a good day, I'll have something magnificent that I've created out of all of these scraps. And on a bad day, I'll just have a big pile of scraps. But I was wondering, when you have that big pile of scraps, how do all of you combat the discouragement that follows from creating that big pile of scraps?
Well, what I just say is it was a stupid day. I mean, I just chalk it up to a stupid day. I mean, there are days that I'm much more clever than others. And if I have a big pile of, nothingness, I just go, oh man, bummer. And I look for something out in the world that will catch my eye, or a person, or an action. And I just sort of keep my eyes open. And, on this topic of reading, I think it's helpful, but never underestimate the power and value of listening, because despite the fact that I write, I'm not a very good reader. So I listen to everything on CD. I have an hour commute each way, and so I listen to other people's writing by having it read to me, and that's very helpful for me. So I'll go back to that.
I'll say socks and underwear. Because if I don't finish writing what I have to write on a given deadline, I'm going to be compelled to go out and find a job where in the morning I have to put on socks and underwear. So that's a motivator. But to sharpen that a bit, I think sometimes it's good to set yourself a deadline. The Larry McMurtry model of writing X words a day, you can throw them away when you want to. But a deadline helps. I mean, for me, a deadline helps because I don't eat if I don't fulfill that obligation, and I have to wear socks and underwear every morning. And I live in Texas in a terrible climate. But I think a deadline helps.
Just another perspective on that. My friend who I told you about before, Host Musen, who told me I wasn't funny and was right, he had a weakness too, which was thinking every idea was the right idea for that show that we were doing. And I had to convince him that a lot of his ideas, yes, were good, but we had this phrase, put it in your pocket, which basically would short circuit all of the conflict between co-creators on projects. And he knew that if I said, just keep it in your pocket, that it meant, trust me, it's not good. And he kept a little, for this project, I mean, I had a different word if it was really a bad idea. But if it was a good idea, put it in your pocket meant put it in your notebook, keep it in your pocket.
That's great.
Yeah. And I went to his house recently, and I remember when he started that book. And he now has a bookcase of these little Moleskine notebooks that he uses. And he just made a show recently that is made almost entirely out of content from the in the pocket material, and he's having enormous success. He and his wife, 2-person clown show traveling around the world, all with the material in the pocket. So just because it wasn't what you were expecting doesn't mean that there's not something there later.
My best teacher gave us that advice to get a notebook, keep a notebook and put your ideas in it. And so I get all these little kids, 8-year-olds, they are all carrying their writing ideas notebook. If you go to visit the Roald Dahl Story Centre, and if you come to England, please do go and visit at Great Missenden. you get a little story ideas book when you go in and go round, and it's fantastic. There's a line of bottles. You can bottle your ideas and make up weird words and so on. So I've been lucky enough to hear a lot of different writers. Martin Waddell, who wrote Can't You Sleep, Little Bear, I don't know if you know that one, and Farmer Duck. I interviewed him in the days before computers, and he had a whole line of manila folders, and each one of those had a different idea for a picture book. And I try and keep those ideas now, and maybe something good will come out of the idea that you thought wasn't good.
All right, thank you. Next here.
Okay, I just want to word this right. I guess my question has to deal with like you, Ms. Weir. Is that how you pronounce it?
Call me Liz.
Liz. How you're talking about how you saw kids like sitting at a table and the parents on phones and the kids on phones. I guess I'm a bit biased, and I have to recognize that as someone who's grown up with a phone always in my back pocket. But
Closer to the mic. Closer to the mic.
closer to the mic. Sorry. Okay. I guess I'm a bit biased with the fact that I've grown up with a phone in my back pocket all the time. But do you not think like there's, I guess, room for creativity in other areas in the arts? I mean, I'm a huge patron of the theatrical arts. And I love it, but I think there's like, what do you think the balance? Where does creativity end and where does it begin?
Don't know a beginning and ending, but I know that I do a lot of work with kids on creating stories with texts using their phones. I mean, I'm a realist. They can't be separated. They'd have to be surgically removed. So, you can do great poems and sort of so many letters and so on, and I get them to do that. But, I mean, when we talk about creativity, we're talking the whole gamut. I just happen to like creative writing, but I mean, artwork, drama, music. I would quite often work collaboratively with, as tomorrow afternoon, with a musician, or with, we did a dancer, a musician, drama person, and me as well. So that worked really well. So I can't say where it begins and where it ends. It's all creative.
Anybody else on that one? All right, let's go to you.
So I thought it was really interesting, and it was nice to hear you guys say that there absolutely are bad ideas in the creative process. Something we need to remind ourselves of, obviously. And I do a lot of work in graphic design, and I guess I'm mainly asking Evelyn and James, how do you figure out where to draw that line between fishing for a fluke and doing something you're comfortable with and you can have confidence will end up looking nice? So for example, so often I can say, well, maybe if I just spend another half an hour on this kind of funky idea, I'll get something really unique out of it. But when do you draw that line, I guess, is the best way I know how to put it.
Well, I can tell you that it's taken me a while to figure out how I work best. But how I work best is to write a first draft of something that I feel, inspired by. It's usually something absurd and ridiculous about myself, most likely. And I write it, and then I know now to leave it. I say to myself, don't think this is so great. You got to come back to it tomorrow. And that's how so I'm very slow, and I'm not able to write a lot. So I think that part of doing that depends on figuring out what your very own creative process and timing is. I can't write after 3 in the afternoon. I'm best at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. I need to leave it. I need to come back to it. I need to think about something completely different. I'll go for a hike with my dogs. I'll mow the lawn. I'll do something completely unrelated to the idea, and then I come back, and then I can pull the stuff out of it that feels best. But that took me a while to find, to learn what my process was. So I think that's how you do it.
Do you work with, do you work with clients in your graphic design work?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Mainly posters and advertisements, some web work as well.
So I think I'll answer this. I'll answer this one way. For me, I just draw the line very clearly between the work that I do for the client and the work that I do for myself, and I make and it shifts. Sometimes it'll be 90% on one side. Sometimes it'll be 90% on the other side. But I always make sure I'm delivering what the client needs, because at the end of the day, that's putting the roof over my head and that's putting the food in my mouth. That doesn't mean you can't over-deliver, which means that if you've delivered exactly what the client is expecting and that little bit more, there's nothing to keep you from pushing forward on some of your funkier ideas, some of your more out-of-the-box ideas. Advertisers do this a lot, where they will actually come up with a great idea that they haven't even been asked for Adidas or something like that. And they'll do this crazy out-of-the-box idea that Adidas would have never paid for. And there's whole magazines, advertising magazines, where you can actually see what these non-commissioned works that these advertising companies did just because there was something about a brand or something about an event or just some idea that clicked with them. And they did these crazy ideas. It's kind of the in the pocket, or in my case, I think of it as the in the studio work, and then there's the in the sales space work, right? And you'll have to negotiate that as you go back and forth. But remember that if you are an entrepreneur, and anyone who's hoping to rely on revenue generated by their art, they are an entrepreneur. You have to be sure that you're meeting your client needs. And if you really can't, you have to do the right thing and tell them that you can't, and then find the clients that you can.
And I think I just want to add that that's why I don't see myself in the same vein as a creative person as my panelists, because I don't have enough of that sustained inspiration to have my creativity put the roof over my head. It's my midwifery patients on heroin that do that. Yeah. I mean, that's what I do. That's how I make a living. My writing, my creative writing is my muse, and it's my medication in life. I mean, that's, yeah.
I think one of the hardest, bravest things for a writer to do is to write a novel. And there's several reasons, but one is because novels are written on speculation, on spec.
Yeah.
If I write a book, I'm going to get half of my payment in advance. And it takes a great deal. I have the greatest admiration for writers of fiction because they spend, particularly long fiction, because they spend a year, 2 years, 3 years working on something and hoping that it's good, and then sending it to a publisher, and then to an agent, and then to a publisher. It's a totally different process. It kind of goes to what you said about throwing away copy. You can afford to do that to a certain point, but I do think it's a remarkably brave thing to do. I am a cowardly writer. I write because I don't want to wear socks and underwear. But I get paid in advance. But there are people in here who are going to go out and write these novels, and they're going to take that chance, and they're going to start with that one good sentence, and they're going to do it. Now, I encourage you to do so.
I wrote a book in 1985 about a child whose father went to prison. And we had many political prisoners at that time in Northern Ireland. And it took me until 2012 to get that book published. So, I don't go into it to make a lot of money, because I've made nothing probably out of that book. And, you're right. And my partner's a journalist, and he keeps saying, well, you have to sell this book. And I said, no, that's not the way it works. You write a book, and then you try and sell it. He gets told to write something, and he gets paid for writing it. It's two very different disciplines.
Thank you. Next question here, please.
Hi, so my name is Clara, and I've been working on a book since 8th grade. I am currently in sophomore year, and I just reached around page 80. So my book is a realistic fiction book, and the main character is basically me, except for not. And she's a very, very depressed 18-year-old. And the majority of my writing I did when I was in a really bad place. And I have to say it's really good. It's one of the things I'm very confident about.
Great.
But lately, it just feels like it's been getting worse and worse because I'm just not in the same place, and I feel like I can't really relate to my character anymore. So I don't know what to do.
Sarah, you know that character. Maybe it's time to step away for a short time to think about that character, not to be that character again. But you know that character, and you own that character, and what you are doing is remarkably courageous. What you're doing I'm so impressed by what you're telling me, because you've actually got to 80 pages. So don't throw it away. Don't let that character defeat you. That character is important. And remember that you own that character. And the remarkable thing about fiction, I'm a journalist. I use the 30% rule. 30% of what I write is I make up, and then the rest is supposed to be true. But you have the great liberty. You have the freedom to take that character where you want to take her. And I think, and one, you're brave to do it. Two, you're brave to stand up and tell us you are a far better woman than I am, believe me. And I admire you for it. Stay with it. And don't let it defeat you.
When my first book about raising sexually healthy teen girls came out of a terrible, terrible adolescence, which was mine. And then having a mother that didn't mother me well through the development of my sexuality, and then watching my mother do the same thing to my daughter, who is her only granddaughter, and only grandchild. And it was a deeply, deeply big piece of psychological work. I couldn't do it until my 40s because I needed the perspective of both of these generations. But so much of what was in my book was this amalgam of myself individuating and then watching my daughter do the same, not experiencing the same threats around it that my mother did with me. You must keep that. Whatever you do, don't give it away. And even if it takes a year or so for you to go back to it, if you find somebody you trust that can help you, work with them. But whatever you do, darling, don't throw it away.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elise Collins, and I noticed today a lot of you talk about your ideas and finding bad ideas and getting feedback on those ideas and the revision process. And I was wondering, how do you personally revise your work? At what point do you decide, I need to put this idea on a shelf? How frequently do you ask for feedback? What's your process?
I'm constantly revising, but sometimes I just put it away. I have a teenage novel that could probably be finished in 2 days. I can't look at it. I don't want to look at it at the minute. I'm just putting it to one side. But what I did do was send it out to some teenagers, and I've got feedback from them, and that's very valuable for me to see, and that's sort of encouraging me, but I have to be in the right place to finish that. So I'm constantly, sometimes I'll write something and I think, yeah, that's great, put it away, read it again, as Evelyn says, and think, no, that could be much better. So I'm very self-critical. I'm often looking at things. So I ask other people for their opinion. I'm part of a writer's group. I have a writer's group at my own house. It's very self-indulgent. People come and we share work together, people whose opinions I value. And I think that's a really good thing, to try and hear what other people think. And sometimes they'll put you down and you'll still keep going because you believe in it. But sometimes you have to step away from it. I think you do.
In the theater world, in my experience, we really revise daily and we give very regular feedback, and we're very diligent about the feedback. One of the pieces I try and do, especially when I'm working in cultures other than the one I grew up in, is to make sure that feedback is not coming from director to artist, but also from artist to artist. That's been my methodology, is never do a run through, never do a scene without making sure everybody is giving feedback on it. And that's the equivalent of writing the 10 pages every day, is to make sure we have to save that time for that feedback, because that's where the creation happens.
Could I add one wee thing? Sorry, I forgot to say. I'm doing a thing tomorrow, an original story that I wrote about World War I. And what I had to do, it was commissioned. So I had to invite in an audience. So we invited about 20 people, a real mixture of ages. And it was scary for me. I've been doing what I do for a long time. I was way out of my comfort zone. So they were all there with their papers and pencils, like having 20 reviewers. And they gave really constructive feedback. And then I took it away and worked in the process. So for me, that was something very different. I was putting myself out there, but I think it was very valuable. So that's quite a useful thing.
I don't have a, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
I can't do the, I can't have a writer's group, or, because it's the group problem again, So, and a lot of my creativity, yeah, it's in this short form writing, but a lot of it is in my public speaking. So James is a very dear friend. I have the equivalent in my spouse who can be ruthless, but she loves me so much and she really believes in my work. So she'll say to me, I think I better come and check up on you. And so she'll come to something that I'm doing, and I'll leave and I'll say, well, how'd it go? And she'll be really straightforward with me, and she'll say, I don't know where you were going with that. How tired were you? Or don't do anything else again at 8 p.m. Or, I don't know where, honey, that wasn't funny. You know, she'll be very, and she knows my voice really well. I mean, we've been together for 22 years, married for 21. She's really funny, you know. So, if you know someone that you trust, you know, you can run it by them. I mean, if you're not a group person or you get, you know, expelled from groups, as I do, you know, find somebody who you trust. Yeah.
You know, I agree with feedback. I just finished, I'm on deadline now, and I just finished a 800-word piece. And you know, I've been writing this for a week, and it just wasn't there. And you reach a point where your editing it might be compared to kind of polishing a turd. My publisher, this is journalism, this is not art, but it was lousy. And my publisher said, well, I have this young editor, and you know, I'm as old as the conference, and this guy's 26, and he said, so very tentatively, would you mind him looking at your work? No, I would not mind him looking at it. I would like him to take this work and do something with it and send it back to me. So I think feedback is good whether you get it. Only there are certain writers that are so good that they can sit in their room and turn out material, and that's good for them. But I don't think I'm that writer.
Thank you.
My name is Dick, and I think that your advice on how to become creative and imaginative is very interesting, because as I hear it, it demonstrates creativity and imagination in the way you express it. And what would, I think, be even more helpful if you could tell us how each of you would define the words creative and imaginative.
I don't want to say socks and underwear. No. I can't go socks and underwear.
I say to children, let your mind go free. You know, let's write a story about a carrot-eating rabbit. Let's write a story about a car driving underwater. Let's, you know, just it's crazy. It might sound crazy, but let's go with it and see where it goes. And you see someone, and the teachers are looking at me. What I do also, I'm by the way, I just throw this in. I make the teachers write when we're writing. I don't want a teacher sitting there, you know. And when I do teachers' workshops, I put white paper in front of them all, and you can feel the room. No. Do we have to write something this? Do we have to show this to somebody? Do we? And I say, what's it like if you're 7? How do you feel? So I think freedom, creativity, to express it, and also to use all your senses. Your sight, sound, that's how I start with young kids. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. And then we throw away, I see, I hear, I feel it, and just take the words and use them. So, freedom.
I would have to say that imaginative is what I'm not, and creative is what I am on a good day. I mean, I don't think of myself as a very imaginative person, and I always, when I do listen to fiction, I think, I don't know how people come up with these ideas. Where do these stories come from? If I were in front of a firing squad, I couldn't do it. But, you know, but creative, I mean, I can take regular daily events and make them very funny on a good day. That's what I say, is I can turn the regular into something creative.
All right. We have another question over here.
The question is, how do you deal with the chaos and the anxiety that comes with that, assuming there is such? The context is that in my attempts to be creative, I've always gone through this chaos, first researching like hell and nothing working, and then finally I just have to let it all fall into pieces before I can build it up. I imagine that is generally how creativity works. Correct me if I'm wrong. And if so, then you have not yet addressed how you deal with the chaos and the anxiety that comes with it. Please do so.
Well, because life is so chaotic and I'm anxious on most days, I don't really know how to answer that. No. It's just a state of being for me. And I kind of I kind of appreciate that. I don't find it something difficult to deal with. I find it more of something to embrace and welcome, because it's often, inspirational for me.
I'm quite an organized person, and although my house is fairly chaotic, when I'm writing, where I'm trying to get ideas together, I try and harness them a bit, and I know a story can take you off in other directions, but I really try and focus on that. And I'm not terribly anxious. I'm anxious if I'm on a deadline, and I'm the sort of person, even when I was at school, I'd be the one sitting the night before the exam at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to cram it all in. But sometimes I'm commissioned to do work, say books on anti-bullying, or books on, I had to do one on Irish travellers, and I knew it had to be in at a certain time, and your inspiration doesn't always come at a certain time, so I've really had to focus very hard. And when I get feeling anxious, I go, as I said at the earlier panel, I go and walk in the forest and clear my head and try not to think about what I should be doing, just try and embrace life, I suppose you'd call it.
I think a lot of creativity is messy. It's part of it. Not for everybody, but I do try and, again, compartmentalize as much as possible to define what my studio is, whether it's a physical studio or a studio in time, and really make sure that I'm not letting that messiness or chaoticness spill over into aspects of my life unless I invite it there because I'm excited about a given idea.
All right, we have time for about 5 more minutes. So.
Just real quickly, I want to let people know, if you're here in Boulder, there's a couple of Anything Goes open mics. If you want to share stuff, storytelling, poetry, whatever. One's Wednesday nights out at 303 Vodka in East Boulder. One's out Thursdays at the Secret Garden. And then Innisfree Poetry bookstore up on the hills, great place. But to the woman who spoke, the young woman who spoke earlier, and maybe James will have a reaction to this. As far as a character goes, at least I was thinking it's not a static character. That's kind of like a sitcom. Nothing changes from week to week. It's the journey and the changes in the character that make a story. So
I wish I'd had that answer at hand when that question was asked. Thank you. I'm serious.
You have a question? Oh, sorry. Didn't see.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, especially if for yourselves, you revise your work. How do you, this is for you, I guess, Liz, how do you get students to revise their work? I teach creative writing, and more every year, every semester, students don't want to share their work and they don't want to revise.
I don't tend to give them much option when I'm working with them. That's part of the deal. I tell them this is what we do, and the teacher has to share her work as well, or his work as well. And I'm working through a process. I'm lucky. I don't have to teach them every day. I don't have to put them through exams every day. I'm brought in to stimulate their creativity, is what they say. And they respond really well to it. And I tell them that famous writers that they may have heard of and seen, even Roald Dahl, I show them photocopies of early editions of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, show the way, and don't use the eraser, don't rub it all out, don't score it out, but keep that word, because you might come back and use that word again, and these are little processes you teach them. So, you show by example, I think, because I write with them and then I show them how I can change my work, how they can change theirs, so that's what I do.
All right, your turn.
English is not my native tongue. Do you? And so I write. I'm not a creative writer. I am academic. So I write in English, and then words don't come, and so I start writing in Italian, which is my native tongue, but I have to publish in English. So then I have to go back and revert to English from Italian, and that gets really messy. Any suggestion? Should I keep with one language?
That's such a fascinating question.
Have you read?
I get Alzheimer, early onset.
Have you read Umberto Eco, Mouse or Rat?
Not that one.
Okay, really, really good book for anyone who's dealing with questions of multilingualism and creation. And he talks about how language defines the way that we create and the way that we think. And what you're describing may very well be a linguistic question, in which case, I mean, it may be as simple as finding someone who's willing to translate, but it's also possible. Exactly, and there is, and this is why Mouse or Rat is just such a fantastic book to read, where he goes through the process of creating in the 3 languages that he writes in, and talks about how very different that is. And I think that much better than I could, it would probably give you some insights into how your Italian and English mind are creating differently.
My friend Steve Kellman in San Antonio, Texas, who's a professor at the University of Texas, he writes you might look at his work. He writes about what he describes as transliterates, such as Conrad, who instead of writing in his native tongue, he wrote in English. And there's a whole process that Steve describes that might be worth looking at. And then again, it might not, but that's a fascinating dilemma.
Another writer that comes into my mind, Ionesco or Samuel Beckett.
Oh, yeah.
These were 2 artists who were writing in a second language and decided to make that part of their creative constraints. The Bald Soprano is actually a deconstruction of the dialogue that Ionesco discovered when he was reading English textbooks. And Samuel Beckett wrote Waiting for Godot in the idea that it could be understood by anyone who had just the most rudimentary understanding of English. And it helped both of those artists work through the challenges that they had of creating in a language that was not their own.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, time has run out on this amazing panel, but I'd like you to join me in thanking our terrific panel. And thank you for attending this the Conference on World Affairs.